This one's been a long time coming. Ghostbusters 2016 was quite literally the perfect storm of everything that people hate about modern Hollywood. An unwelcome, unwanted, unfunny franchise reboot of a beloved 1980s classic, starring 4 theoretical comedians desperately trying to improv their way through 2 hours of screen time, written and directed by a pompous, overdressed idiot who thought that alien ghosts were a $1 billion idea.
This man has no dick.
And whose standard approach to comedy was to turn on a camera and shout, "Be funny!" and released into a highly charged, highly politicised marketplace to a storm of fan backlash and box office catastrophe. Other movies might have followed a similar pattern with equally disastrous results, but Ghostbusters was the one that failed first and failed biggest. It set a benchmark for cinematic shittiness that's never quite been equalled. But was it really as bad as they say, or have we misjudged Ghostbusters 2016? Alright, let's give it a fair shot, I guess. Grab the strongest alcohol available, the kind you reserve for end-of-the-world scenarios, and join me as I plunge into the river of ectoplasm that is Ghostbusters 2016.
Mother of God.
The movie kicks off with a spooky prologue showing a random character getting attacked by a ghost, just like the original. But whereas the 1984 version was short, serious and punchy, perfectly setting the tone for the rest of the film, this one is more than twice as long, and it feels tedious and overblown. It tries too hard to push unfunny jokes,
including a face bidet and an anti-Irish security fence.
And it culminates in a violent and chaotic action scene that feels gratuitous and unnecessary. The problem here is that you can have goofy slapstick comedy, or you can have serious and dramatic horror, but you can't really do both at the same time. Anyway, then we flash over to Erin Gilbert, a university lecturer that's on track for permanent tenure until Ed Begley Jr. shows up. He wants her to investigate the haunted mansion, and he found her because a book she co-authored about ghosts is being republished. You might say it's come back to haunt her. Anyway, Erin needs this all to go away pronto, so she tracks down her old friend Abby. Abby's become a full-on ghost hunter since they last spoke, and she's partnered up with this piece of comedy genius.
How can you be eating right now? Try saying no to these salty parabolas.
Oh, Holtzman, stop it. I only have so many ribs. Anyway, Erin wants Abby to remove her name from the book, but she's like, nah, it'll be fine. She'll only do it if Erin agrees to go on a ghost hunt with her. I think this is the point where I'd consider turning Abby into a ghost myself, but whatever. The script needs the rest of the plot to happen, so Erin goes along with the Goofy gang to the haunted house from the prologue. That's when they run into their very first ghost, and this happens. Oh, what hilarity. See, It's funny because she's getting thrown up on. I love how the others are just standing there watching this happen like a pair of total bellends. You realise that this slime could be corrosive acid, or radioactive, or filled with flesh-eating bacteria, right? So Erin thinks this is all great and immediately starts babbling into the nearest camera about how ghosts are real. But then the footage mysteriously gets uploaded online and Charles Dance finds out about it like immediately and then fires her. Jesus, how popular is this fucking clip that an elderly lecturer could find out about it in a matter of hours?
Shite.
Never mind, we need to establish the same exact scenario as the original movie because the writers don't have an ounce of fucking imagination in their heads. Then they hire a building and set up shop. They even hire a receptionist named Kevin for no other reason than because he's good looking. I guess in Paul Feig's mind this is funny because it's like a gender swapped version of Janine from the original movie. Great stuff, except Janine was snarky and sarcastic and actually pretty efficient at her job, whereas Kevin acts like he has actual learning difficulties, struggles to perform even basic tasks, and wears glasses without any lenses in them because, humour, I guess? See, this is funny because he's really comically over-the-top stupid. I hope Chris Hemsworth got a really generous paycheck for his work here, because this movie proves that you can't put a price on your self-respect. So basically, we've got the same exact setup as the original movie, except it takes about 15 minutes longer for the script to meander its way there. This is where we meet the final member of the Ghostbuster imposters, Patty Tolan, a character that's, well, an acquired taste, like fucking bleach.
Hell no, the devil is a liar! Get out of my friend, ghost!
Anyway, Patty sees a ghost in the subway, so she calls the Ghostbusters and they use their new proton pack to try to catch it. But it doesn't work because the proton beam sputters out like a weak piss.
Wow, that was exciting.
But then the ghost gets hit by a train and that somehow kills it. What the fuck? You realise this is a ghost, right? Like, it can move through solid objects and it's totally not constrained by the physical rules of our world. Like this one here, which passes straight through a wall with no difficulty.
Well, that's definitely shite.
The point of this whole sequence is to give Patty an excuse to join the team. I'm not kidding, she just quits her job and shows up like the next day with some really dated Oprah Winfrey references.
You get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car!
This is about as funny as my last liver biopsy. Remember when Winston joined the Ghostbusters for no other reason than because they needed extra help and he was looking for a job? Like, that was it. The whole process took about 2 minutes. It made total sense and it gave an effective understanding of his character.
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
You know, it's kind of amusing to see the writers copying the same structure and story beats from the original, but trying so hard to do it in a different way that they ended up heaping on layers of convoluted and unnecessary bullshit just because they can. It's like remaking Star Wars A New Hope, but instead of Obi-Wan Kenobi just giving Luke his father's lightsaber so the story can move on, instead he gets involved in a wacky pod race against a rogue Jawa, but crashes halfway through and discovers a hidden cave with a sandworm inside that happens to be terrified of humans and shits out the lightsaber from sheer terror before self-destructing right in front of him.
Wow, that was exciting.
Either way, you end up with the same result, but it's how you get there that matters. There really is something to be said for doing things quickly and efficiently. Anyway, so now the gang are together, it's time to meet the exciting and terrifying villain of this story. Oh. This is Rowan. Rowan is a sad, pathetic, middle-aged man with an inflated sense of self-importance who nobody likes or respects. Bit of art imitating life there, Paul. It turns out Rowan is behind the recent surge in ghost sightings because he's invented some magical bullshit device that allows ghosts to cross over into our world. And he plans to use them to take revenge because nobody respects him. You know, you can always tell a movie like this because not only do the antagonists always belong to a certain demographic, but the script also goes out of its way to make them incompetent and pathetic. It's like the writers hate them so much, they can't even do them the courtesy of making them worthy enemies. So naturally, the Ghostbuster imposters figure out Rowan's plan and track him down to a hotel where he's about to open a portal to the ghost world. Then he electrocutes himself and dies. Wow, that was a bit anticlimactic, but at least it's over now and oh fuck no! So Rowan explodes out of a sink and possesses Abby until Patty literally slaps him out of her, because I guess that's how paranormal possessions work. Also, I'm no doctor, but wouldn't twisting your neck 180 degrees like this kill a person instantly? Whatever. So then he takes control of Kevin, who's standing around like a useless plank of wood as always, and uses him to go back to the hotel and open the portal, which summons an army of ghosts that the Ghostbuster imposters have to fight their way through like it's an actual war. What the fuck is this movie even trying to be? Why do the proton packs now vaporize ghosts when they didn't before? Why does Holtzman have proton pistols? Why did the editors think this line was funny enough to make the final cut?
I lost my glasses! Oh, wait, I got them! They're in my hand!
Naturally, they end up facing off against Rowan himself, who asks them to choose what form he should take, while ripping off another classic scene from the original movie in a completely nonsensical context. Great work, Paul!
This man has no dick.
Anyway, this time he turns into a really shitty version of the Ghostbusters logo and starts destroying the city like he's fucking Godzilla. So they shoot him in the balls and blow up the Ecto-1, which is driven by Slimer and his girlfriends? Which closes the portal and magically puts everything back the way it was, so there's no actual long-term implications to any of this. With the city back to normal, the Ghostbuster imposters are given a new headquarters, ready for future adventures that I'm sure will totally happen. And that's it. That's the funny but not in a good way plot for Ghostbusters 2016.
But what a ride.
You know, when I started this video, I jokingly questioned whether this movie deserved all the hatred it got, and after rewatching every shitty moment of it for this review, I can wholeheartedly confirm that yes, it really did. Ghostbusters 2016 is 116 minutes of sheer, unadulterated, lowbrow, low-effort, desperate, disposable garbage that never should have seen the light of day. A $150 million vanity project that feels like it was written by a child, made all the worse because its very existence soils the legacy of one of the most beloved movies ever made. I could probably spend hours explaining why virtually every aspect of it is so disastrously wrong, but I don't want to spend a second longer on this turd than I absolutely have to. Instead, I'm going to confine my criticism to 5 main areas, so let's get started. Number 1, the plot. The story for Ghostbusters 2016 is basically a shameless copy of the original movie, with all the same story beats, plot elements, and iconic moments. There's a prologue to set the scene, the first ghost encounter that goes wrong, the first successful capture, a skeptic who causes problems later, 2 characters getting possessed, a full-scale ghost invasion, the antagonist reveal, a giant rampaging monster, and a portal that has to be closed in order to save the world. The difference, of course, lies in the execution. The original movie was smartly paced and tightly constructed, so that events built logically on each other. Every action caused a reaction that impacted the flow of the story. Venkman's early dismissal of Walter Peck eventually resulted in a breach of the containment field, allowing 2 important characters to join forces and summon the main antagonist of the movie. Ray's fondness for Stay Puft Marshmallows causes him to cave in at a vital moment. Crossing the proton streams is established as a dangerous action that could get them all killed.
Try to imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light.
Ultimately, it becomes the means of their salvation. In the new version, events are forced together because the script needs them to happen, awkwardly shoehorning in familiar story beats and iconic moments to exploit the nostalgia, but stripping them of context because the writers are useless fucking hacks. Speaking of which, it's interesting that Paul Feig only signed on after he was given a creative blank check to do whatever he wanted with this movie. He could have written practically anything, had the story go off in a completely different direction, and explore the wildest concepts his imagination could conceive. And this is what he gave us. A dumbed-down, exploitative, meandering rehash of the original story. Great work, you dick. Number 2, the characters. Every character in this movie is a ridiculous cartoon exaggeration of a real person. Like Kevin, who's so over-the-top stupid that I think he might be developmentally challenged. The ridiculously snooty and elitist dean of the university. Or the mayor of the city, whose only character trait is that he hates being compared to the mayor from Jaws. But it's the 4 main protagonists that are the biggest problem. Naturally, they invite comparisons to the original Ghostbusters, and it's not exactly hard to see why. Holtzman is clearly meant to be this film's equivalent to Egon. She's an engineer that builds and maintains the team's technology. But whereas Egon was quiet, reserved and dry-humoured, acting as the straight man of the group, Holtzman is over the top and ludicrous. She's always pulling weird faces like she's suffering some kind of hemorrhage, eating stuff at inappropriate moments, licking things, making queef jokes. It's like Kate McKinnon took one look at Egon and thought, he's a bit eccentric and weird, I'm gonna dial that up to 11 because that'll make me better.
Not a great plan.
Patty is the natural counterpart to Winston because they're both working class outsiders who join the group later. Winston was the relatable everyman of the team. He wasn't a scientist or a paranormal expert, he was just a regular guy who needed a job, and his lack of expertise allowed him to be the voice of the audience, making sense of some of the spiritual technobabble that the other characters were spouting.
That's a big Twinkie.
Patty, on the other hand, is loud and dumb and uncouth. She's always making shit jokes, and she's played by an actress that yells every line of forced, awkward dialogue like she thinks humour is somehow tied into volume.
The power of Patty compels you!
I don't have any particular opinions on Leslie Jones's comedy abilities because I haven't seen her in anything else outside this film, and I'm totally fine with that in retrospect. But either way, even the best comedian would struggle to make a character like this work. Abby is more or less in line with Ray. She's idealistic and passionate, but she doesn't really have much common sense or business instincts. And holy shit, Melissa McCarthy doesn't do her any favours.
It's a lot heavier than I expected. Turning the machine on. Okay, this is a little underwhelming. Can we get more power? Ooh, boy, she's got an impressive purr. Hey, Patty, can I get some illumination on this subject?
Just like Patty, she's loud and abrasive, and she stands there yelling every one of her lines like my granddad after I sold his hearing aid for drinking money. I've never been a big fan of McCarthy, because generally I see her as a female Adam Sandler, only not as funny, and Ghostbusters has done absolutely nothing to change that opinion. Lastly, there's Erin, who I guess functions a bit like Venkman, only without Bill Murray's charm, charisma, likability, and dry sarcastic humour. But in terms of personality, she's kind of an amalgamation of all three main characters from the original. She starts out dismissive about the existence of ghosts, but when she loses her job, she sees potential in a new business venture, just like Venkman. Her goal here is to silence her critics and resurrect her career. In short, she's doing this for personal gain. But she's also quirky and socially awkward like Egon, and doesn't seem to know how to deal with people. And she's kind of naive and easy to manipulate, like when Abby guilts her into going on their first investigation, or a skeptic provokes her into releasing a captured ghost. She feels like a weird combination of different and often contradictory traits that don't really coalesce into a viable character. And it's not helped by Kristen Wiig, who acts like she's kind of embarrassed to be here. Wiig's been in some pretty successful movies in her time, and I imagine she's got a decent instinct for what works and what doesn't, so she knew this one was a fucking turd. The thing these characters all have in common is that they're over-the-top, one-dimensional caricatures. They behave like 10-year-olds trapped in the bodies of middle-aged women, and they have absolutely no chemistry together. The four original actors played well off each other with little quips, sarcastic remarks, and subtle facial expressions. But now these guys bark their lines at each other like it's some kind of competition to see who can be the most loud and overbearing, all of them trying and failing to be funny. Which brings me neatly along to my next issue. Number 3, the humour. And I use that word pretty fucking loosely in this case, believe me. Never have I seen a movie try so hard to be funny and fail so spectacularly. It's all forced, cheap, dumb, obvious, desperate gags that feel like they came from the mind of a 5-year-old. This is funny because the lady is getting puked on. This is funny because fart jokes. It's only funny when I do it. This is funny because the fat lady's getting thrown around. This is funny because they shoot a ghost in the balls. Not only is this the kind of shit you'd expect from preschoolers, but it usually gets carried on to the point where you actually start to feel bad for the actors. Like this scene where Patty shows up in her father's hearse, and the others question whether there's a dead body inside.
Hope you checked to see there wasn't a body in the back.
And the gag just keeps going.
I think so. I don't really know.
You didn't check?
And going.
I mean, I was in a hurry. I checked to see if we had gas. That was more important.
And going.
Let Hostman check. She likes that type of stuff.
And going.
Yeah, I can think of 7 good uses of a cadaver today.
Oh, Jesus, make it stop. As the old saying so rightly goes, brevity is the soul of wit. That means the only thing worse than a bad joke is a long-winded bad joke. See, timing is really important in humour, and having a good instinct for when to pause and let a joke breathe for a moment, or move on quickly so you don't oversell it, is what separates, well, Ghostbusters from Ghostbusters 2016. Imagine that same gag, except with about 90% of the pointless dialogue cut out.
Hope you checked to see there wasn't a body in the back.
In response, Patty just shrugs and says, maybe. Then the camera cuts back to the others looking confused and slightly worried. I mean, it wouldn't exactly have people rolling in the aisles, but it might erase a few smiles at least. But if there's one piece of advice I would give the actors in this movie, it's to shut the fuck up. There is literally always someone talking in this film. Sometimes multiple characters all at once.
I got some pretty cool stuff cooking up over here if you want to just turn your head. I improved beam accuracy by adding a plasma shield to the RF discharge chamber. I have cryocooler to reduce helium boil-off.
Not to mention the Flooby-Dooby tube synthesized from pure rhino milk. And instead of being funny, it just becomes exhausting and irritating, like a bunch of hyperactive kids all demanding attention. By all accounts, Paul Feig is a big fan of improv, which is fine in small doses I guess, but it all depends on your actors being able to come up with great jokes on the fly, and the director being able to keep them on track, and based on what I've seen here, they're not and he didn't. I think everyone involved knew this too, because there's a sense of tension and desperation to most of these scenes. It reminds me of a stand-up act that knows his set isn't landing, but he doesn't have a backup, so he's desperately trying to come up with new stuff as he goes. The other problem with giving your actors free rein like this is that you end up with scenes that are long, flabby and meandering instead of being tight and concise. In the original movie, there's barely a single line that feels unnecessary. Every scene and conversation contributes something to the story and characters. I don't know what this scene's meant to contribute to, except my liver cirrhosis. Number 4, the Antagonist. Well, this should be a short one. What the fuck can I even say about Rowan? Not much, to be honest, because he's the most boring, forgettable villain since Ewan McGregor in Birds of Prey. He's a loser with no friends who wants to take revenge by raising an army of ghosts to destroy the world. Okay. Remember Gozer from the original movie? Remember how she didn't even appear until like the last 10 minutes, building up a real air of anticipation and unease? Remember when Louis Tully got possessed by the eccentric and talkative Keymaster, or Dana was taken over by the sensual and dangerous Zool? Remember how each of these characters were unique and memorable because they were so alien and otherworldly? Do you really think anyone's gonna feel the same way about this guy? Number 5, the cameos. This is probably the saddest part of the whole movie for me. Most of the original cast are here in pointless cameos that are completely out of context, just like everything else. Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson are on screen for about 10 seconds, and even Sigourney Weaver shows up at the end. But the biggest offender here is Bill Murray. Sony basically forced him to appear in this one against his will, and it shows. It's just kind of sad to see these beloved actors relegated to humiliating cameos that they totally phone in. Why even have them in the movie if you won't let them do anything meaningful? Oh yeah, silly me. So what the hell can we make of this unholy fusion of desperately unfunny jokes, unlikable characters, unoriginal storytelling, shameless grabs at nostalgia, and incompetent direction? Well, for me, it betrays a total lack of understanding of what made its predecessor so good. The original Ghostbusters had plenty of funny moments, and guys like Murray and Aykroyd knew just when to inject a bit of levity, but for the most part it was played straight. It wasn't trying to be some wacky, off-the-wall comedy. It was a legit horror movie that took its supernatural elements seriously, but it used the occasional bit of sly, carefully judged humour to lighten the tone. It was well paced and tightly structured, with barely a line or a scene that felt bloated or out of place. The characters were likeable, and the actors played well off each other, complementing their performances instead of competing with each other. The ghosts were presented as a genuine threat that the audience should take seriously. It was filled with iconic imagery and memorable moments, and overall, it was a fun, smart, classic movie that's as entertaining today as it was 36 years ago. Ghostbusters 2016, on the other hand, is rushed, bloated, amateurish, self-indulgent, poorly conceived and horribly executed. A movie that tries so hard to emulate the success of the original without having any understanding of what it's copying. A movie that proves definitively that, well, they got it right the first time. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.